Welcome to another Miami Corona Project conversation. It's my pleasure today to have Carlos de Armas as our guest. Mr. de Armas has been a Miami-Dade County resident since 2005. He holds a master's degree in international business from Florida International University, where he also received his bachelor's in business administration. He's an entrepreneur, a consultant, a former banker, and now a candidate for Miami-Dade County Mayor. Such a pleasure to have you here, Mr. Armas. How are you doing today?
Thank you. It's a very interesting introduction. I don't think I deserve it, but thank you.
It's my pleasure. My pleasure. No, it's first of all, it's a big act of public service for you to jump into a field. As you know, there's 7 candidates running for Mayor of Miami-Dade County. 4 of them are people who have been in office and have big endorsements and campaign chests and name recognition. And those, of course, are 3 sitting county commissioners and a former 2-term executive mayor. And there are 3 other candidates, including yourself, who are lesser known, but still, because this is a democracy, want to put your hat in the ring. And although I would love to talk to you broadly about all sorts of concerns, most of which are interconnected, I mean, nothing here is independent, I really just want to focus specifically on this pandemic. And I'm just wondering what, first of all, before I ask you what perspectives you would bring as a mayor to solving the pandemic, has the pandemic impacted you personally in a way, you or your family or your household?
Everybody, has impacted everybody.
Right.
Yeah, it's a worldwide issue. It's a pandemic, and we cannot hide that. There's no way to ignore it. We need to acknowledge that this is something that is really changing the world and changing the way we socialize and we do so many things. At least for the time, we find a solution for this. This is not the first pandemic in the world. This is something that is happened and has happened before and will happen again. It's about to be prepared. And sadly, caught us without enough preparation to deal with it. And that's sad. And happening this in the most powerful country in the world, makes everybody to think about, what's exactly are we doing? Because we should have already in place a systematic or systemic way or procedure to deal with pandemics. Yes, I don't understand how we don't have that. Yeah. I understand there was one, or was defunded, and I don't understand why. This is something that we need to just be prepared for, because this is something that is going to happen. Like the big numbers theory says, we have a probability for an event to happen. It will happen. We don't know when. It's gonna come. So we just need to be prepared, and we weren't so unprepared.
Yeah, I know that the same way that the Latin America and the hemisphere and the United States looks at Miami as its capital, the world sees the United States. It has historically for the last century, definitely since World War II, as this beacon, as this leadership beacon. And it's particularly, I mean, yes, in culture and industry and stuff like that, but particularly in public health, the United States was the source of knowledge and the solutions for pandemics. So you are right. Right now, the United States, knowing that this pandemic existed both in Asia and in Europe before it hit our shores, was caught completely unprepared for it. And perhaps because of the structure of our nation, the way that supply chains happen, how you can control because of globalization, for a myriad of reasons, things have gotten worse. And I'm just wondering, and let's just look at Miami and the United States in the context of Latin America. I just learned today that our beloved Peru is one of the nations that's now the top 5 nations. Brazil, and Peru are included. Sure, there's India, there's Russia, but it's the US, Brazil, and Peru. Those mark the top 5, and these are nations that would have normally received aid and support from the United States, but we can hardly figure out our own problems. And I'm just wondering, again, a lot to ask of a person who is running for mayor of a small, well, it's not small, it's a major city, but a small fraction of the world population. What recommendations do you have? Let me ask it another way. What would you do on day one as mayor of Miami-Dade County to improve the situation as we move forward, both in literally, and you know, the cases are on the rise right now. Like right now in Miami, we are in crisis. Jackson is running out of ICU beds right now, today. July 6th is running out of ICU beds, and the numbers keep on ramping up. Almost a quarter of the people tested in Miami-Dade County today are positive for the virus. So we are literally ramping up the way the disease is impacting us. And the person sworn into office in November to be our new mayor is going to have this in their hands. What would a Mayor de Armas administration look like in solving this issue on day one, but also in a more holistic way to prepare as we move forward for future pandemics?
As soon as this started, we start to talk about it probably like in March, probably half of March or so. I start to research about it because I am not a scientific or anything like that. I'm not an MD.
Yeah, you're a banker and you're an entrepreneur. Yeah.
I start to research about it. And my position about what to do is already in videos and tweets and in my Facebook from those days. And my recommendation from the very beginning was like, we need to use masks. Nobody was saying to use masks at that point. I was the first one raising the voice, if I am not mistaken, here in Miami, that we need to use the mask. You know, the government started to talk about the social distancing. We had agree on points. That helps. That needs to be done, and because that's the way to slow the spread. But also, I said that we need to create a team of people doing random testing on the streets from the very beginning. If we had done it from the beginning, we would reduce the impact so much as of now. When we need to have people around the streets looking for positive, not waiting for them to come, because you know what? What I found at the very beginning is that this pandemic, this COVID-19 thing, they doesn't show up symptoms until probably 2 or 3 weeks later when you get infected. So this is a dormant illness that allows the hostess to spread it in a silent way for 2 or 3 weeks before it shows symptoms.
Yeah, in fact, it's a novel virus. It's a virus that we're learning about, a virus that's mutating, a virus that is, we're learning a lot about. We initially thought it was a pulmonary virus. Now we're seeing it's systemic. It impacts all that. So yeah, so I think most elected officials would defer to science and would say, okay, whatever my Surgeon General for the state or whatever my federal response would be, or even our public health department here in Miami-Dade County, and that's the way it would happen. But it's the body the constituents, the population, the residents. And look, Miami's been relatively good. I think in some ways we behave a little bit more like the Northeast than we do with the northern parts of this state. South Florida has always been a little bit more aligned, I think, with that mindset. It's not part of a very conservative mentality. And unfortunately, that conservative, and I don't even want to call it conservative, I want to just tie it up to the present leadership, the leadership in the White House, and a lot of parts of our country that are aligned. Today, as you know, in fact, yesterday, the president said that 99% of people impacted, the people who were contaminated by the virus, would have no impact, that it would be harmless to them, when we know that 5 to 10% do wind up sick and in hospitals and getting heart attacks or strokes. So we don't even know what this virus will eventually look like. Sure, there's some populations that aren't impacted, but my question to you on day one as mayor, sure, you have the science behind you, and you would, hopefully every candidate I've interviewed would clearly follow the science. My bigger question is, how do you break through this polarized political divide where you follow your political leader depending on your partisan perspective, as opposed to making this a nonpartisan, non-political public health issue? Again, what would a person who's never held public office, I don't even know what party you're in, actually don't want to know, what would someone like you bring to that conversation?
Basically, my platform, when you navigate through it, you find that I'm concerned about being the mayor for Miami-Dade, regardless. I am not trying to be the mayor for some part of Miami-Dade or leave somebody else out. This is an inclusive platform, and I don't think a leader should go that path. I know parties exist. I know they are useful to get you elected, but a party shouldn't be a cage in any case. I'm a good listener. My kind of leadership is listening. I learn from people. I'm always open to learn, because that is the only way to make the most informed decisions that you can make. You cannot always be right, even though when you listen to everybody, you can make a mistake. When you are able to listen, that risk of being wrong gets reduced in some way, somehow. And that's what I'm trying to do. I am not, some other candidates may say, no, I know everything. I've been in power for 2 terms and I've been for 20 years in the public service and this and that. But, if you know everything and you are that good, why we're having this kind of problems now? Because you've been there, so you shouldn't be going through this. So
in your conversation, you mentioned that you're a mayor for you want to be a mayor for all the county, not just for a particular group. It's for all. So I think my last question I want to ask you is, I think this pandemic has exposed, and I mean, this is our first time we meet. I don't. No, you came here in 2005. I don't know what your community, where you came from, or how many communities you've really engaged or interacted with here locally in the 15 years you've been here. But this pandemic has exposed vulnerabilities and exacerbated problems, particularly with those at society's margins, along race and along income level. And I'm just wondering if there are some lessons that we have learned from those who didn't have the security to withstand the disease, who had to continue working, who couldn't shelter in place, who had to take public transport, who had and continue to this day make themselves, even a little bit, but make themselves more vulnerable than those who have means. Is there some lessons that you've learned here about this pandemic? And what would someone who, again, I don't know if you had political experience outside of Miami before 2005, but someone with no political experience, how would you work with a commission of 13 people, a multi-billion-dollar budget, in implementing strategies that would help resolve the vulnerabilities exposed by this pandemic?
Number one, I don't believe in races. For me, there's only one race, human race. That's it. That's a point I want to clarify. I find silly that we divide like we.
No, but the truth is that there are particular segments of our community. If you look at the race, I think the impact of those impacted 22 out of 10,000 are white. Closer to 2/3 are Black and Latino. Again, Miami has a different kind of demographic. But nonetheless, I would argue that the poorer people, and in this country, that poverty is completely tied to the fact that you may not see different races, but the system, systematically, in my opinion at least, has policies that you may not want to be racist, but if your policies have racist outcomes, then that's all you need to know. So in a world where racism is systemic, what would your administration do, learning from these, clearly these lessons today, to address those specific minority populations that are impacted?
And my next statement, what is this one? There's always a portion of the population that gets the worst part. And because of that, and we know it already, inside that plan to deal with a pandemic should be a portion already dedicated to deal with those people that may be impacted more than others. Mm-hmm. Poverty is an issue, exists, and is going to be with us. We can lower it, we can manage it, we can improve the level or decrease the level of poverty by working the economics, but at the end, differences will always be part of our life. This is a fact unless we find another way to live. But we need to protect precisely those who are less fortunate or have the less ability to deal with themselves with an issue, with a monster like this one. This is why we are humans. And this will be part of the plan we will implement and we will put in place. Will be basically be addressed to those people that are more vulnerable to a pandemic like this, for sure. The one that doesn't need to go to work because they have savings or whatever, they are less impacted unless they want to go to a party or something like that. But whoever has to go to work every day, has to use public transportation, has to deal with other people, are at more risk for sure.
Well,
you want me to be more specific?
No. That was, I think that captured it beautifully. I want to echo that. In other words, we are as strong as our weakest link. And clearly in a public health infectious pandemic, if we're leaving swaths of our population to be vulnerable, out of human compassion and love, we should care for them, but also out of self-interest, because if one part of us is unhealthy, then all of us are at risk of being unhealthy. It's such a pleasure to meet you, and I want to thank you. It takes a lot to run for public office. It takes a lot to run an uphill battle, to give of yourself freely, to try to get your ideas across. And I celebrate you for doing that, for being so civically engaged that you have the courage, the audacity to put your hat in the ring as a candidate for your first public office, to be the second most powerful man in the state of Florida. So congratulations and good luck on your campaign. And thanks for sharing your voice with us today.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for this honor.
All right, take care.